r/ProRevenge my cult leader father destroyed our family, so I exposed him to FBI. The FBI agent's business card felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket as I sat across from my father at our weekly family dinner, a mandatory gathering that had become nothing more than another one of his theatrical performances. The Lord has blessed our community with 17 new souls this month, Dad announced to the table, his voice carrying that familiar mesmerizing tone that had fooled so many people. Brother Michael and sister Sarah have donated their inheritance to help us build the new prayer hall. My stomach churned. I knew exactly what that meant. Another elderly couple had just signed over their life savings to the Church of Divine Awakening, my father's elaborate con that he'd been running out of our sprawling compound in rural Oregon for the past 8 years. Mom nodded enthusiastically, her eyes glazed with the same vacant devotion I'd watched consume her personality piece by piece. Praise be, she whispered. The sacrifice will bring them closer to salvation. My younger sister Emma, now 16, barely looked up from her plate. My brother David, 14, seemed to shrink further into his chair. They'd both learned, like I had, that asking questions or showing doubt only led to hours-long, spiritual counseling sessions, with Dad that left you feeling like your mind had been put through a blender. Speaking of sacrifice, Dad's piercing blue eyes suddenly locked onto mine. I noticed you haven't been attending evening prayers lately, son. The way he said, son, made my skin crawl. There was always an underlying threat in his voice now, ever since I'd started college and begun seeing the outside world. Ever since I'd started questioning why we needed armed guards at the compound gates, why families weren't allowed to leave together, why young women kept disappearing into Dad's private quarters for special blessing ceremonies. I've been studying, I replied carefully. You know, keeping up my grades so I can better serve the church after graduation. It was a lie wrapped in his own rhetoric, the only way to survive conversations with him anymore. What I'd actually been doing was documenting everything. Every financial transaction I could access, every disturbing ritual I witnessed, every woman who came to me in tears describing what my father had done to them behind closed doors. Dad smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Knowledge without spiritual foundation is meaningless, my boy. Perhaps you need some additional guidance to realign your priorities. My mother reached across the table and grabbed my hand, her grip desperate. Please, honey. Don't fight this. Just do what your father asks. The broken hope in her voice nearly shattered me. This was the woman who used to read me bedtime stories, who taught me to ride a bike, who once upon a time had dreams of becoming a teacher. Now she was a hollow shell, another casualty of my father's psychological warfare. But I couldn't save her. Not yet. I tried reasoning with her, tried showing her evidence of what Dad really was, but the programming ran too deep. She'd only report back to him, putting all of us in more danger. Of course, Dad, I said, forcing a smile. I'd appreciate your guidance. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied with my submission. If only he knew about the hidden camera in my backpack, recording every word. If only he knew about the flash drives full of evidence hidden in my dorm room. If only he knew that in less than 3 weeks, this would be our last family dinner before the FBI came knocking. The additional guidance session began the next morning at 5 a.m. sharp. Dad had summoned me to his office, a spacious room at the center of the compound that he designed to intimidate. Religious artwork covered the walls alongside framed photos of him with local politicians who'd been fooled by his charitable facade. Behind his massive oak desk hung a portrait of himself painted by one of his followers, depicting him with an almost Christ-like glow. Sit, he commanded without looking up from the papers spread across his desk. I settled into the uncomfortable wooden chair facing him, the same chair where I'd watched countless followers get psychologically dismantled and rebuilt according to his specifications. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now on the receiving end. Your mother is worried about you, he began, finally raising his eyes to meet mine. She says you've been distant. Cold. She thinks college is filling your head with worldly temptations. I'm just focused on my studies, Dad. You always said education was important for. Don't. His voice cracked like a whip. Don't quote my own teachings back to me like some mindless drone. I know exactly what you're doing. My blood turned to ice. Did he suspect? Had someone seen me talking to that FBI agent in town? I forced my expression to remain neutral, drawing on years of practice hiding my thoughts from him. You're pulling away from the family, he continued, standing and beginning to pace behind his desk. Creating distance. Testing boundaries. It's a classic pattern I've seen dozens of times with young people who think they've outgrown their spiritual foundation. Relief flooded through me. He didn't know about the investigation, he was just doing what he always did, using psychological manipulation to maintain control. I'm not pulling away, I lied smoothly. If anything, being at college has made me appreciate what we have here even more. I see how lost and empty other students are without faith. Dad paused his pacing, studying my face with those predatory eyes that had convinced so many people he could see into their souls. Prove it, he said suddenly. There's a family considering joining us. The Hendersons, they have 2 teenage daughters and a substantial savings account from selling their farm in Idaho. I want you to help bring them into the fold. My stomach dropped. He wanted me to become an active recruiter, to help him destroy another innocent family. The Hendersons would be just like all the others. Within 6 months, their money would be gone, their daughters would be isolated from outside contact, and their parents would be completely dependent on Dad's approval for every aspect of their lives. I'd be honored to help, I heard myself saying. Good. He smiled that cold, calculating smile. They're arriving tomorrow for a 3-day trial visit. I want you to spend time with their daughters. Rebecca is 18, Michelle is 16. Show them how fulfilled our young people are here. Make them eager to stay. The assignment felt like a test, and maybe it was. Or maybe he genuinely believed his own propaganda about our fulfilled life. Either way, I had no choice but to play along. Of course. Should I take time off from classes? Already arranged. I called the college and told them you had a family emergency. His grin widened. Which isn't technically a lie, is it? As I left his office, my mind was already racing. The Henderson family would arrive tomorrow, walking straight into my father's web. I had maybe 24 hours to figure out how to protect them without blowing my cover. The FBI couldn't move fast enough. More innocent people were about to have their lives destroyed, and I was about to become an accessory to their destruction. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, the same room where my father used to tell me bedtime stories about being chosen by God for a special purpose. Now those walls felt like they were closing in on me. The Henderson family would arrive in less than 12 hours, and I still had no plan. I couldn't warn them directly, that would expose everything I'd been working toward. But I also couldn't stand by and watch my father systematically destroy another family, especially knowing what he had planned for their teenage daughters. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway. My door creaked open, and Emma slipped inside, closing it silently behind her. "Can't sleep either," she whispered, settling on the edge of my bed. I sat up, surprised. Emma had been so withdrawn lately that we barely spoke anymore. Looking at her in the moonlight streaming through my window, I noticed how thin she'd gotten, how dark the circles under her eyes were. "Em, are you okay?" She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. Then, in a voice so small I could barely hear it, she said, "I know what Dad does to the older girls." My blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" "The special blessing ceremonies." "I know they're not what he tells everyone they are." Her hands were shaking. "Sarah Morrison told me before her family left. She made me promise not to tell anyone, but I think he's going to want to give me one soon. Now that I'm 16. Every protective instinct I had roared to life. Sarah Morrison had been 17 when her family suddenly departed the compound 6 months ago. Dad had told everyone they'd been called to serve elsewhere, but I remembered how broken she'd looked in those final weeks, how she'd flinched whenever any adult man came near her. "Emma, listen to me." I grabbed her hands, trying to keep my voice calm. Has Dad done anything to you?" "Said anything?" "Not yet. But yesterday he told me I was blossoming into a beautiful young woman, and that soon I'd be ready to take on more responsibility in the church." She looked up at me with terrified eyes. "That's what he told Sarah right before it started." My mind was racing. This changed everything. I couldn't wait for the FBI investigation to slowly build its case. Emma was in immediate danger. But if I moved too fast, if I tried to get her out now, Dad would know something was wrong. He'd disappear with his core followers, set up somewhere else, and continue destroying lives while avoiding justice. "Does Mom know?" I asked. Emma's laugh was bitter and hollow, too cynical for a 16-year-old. "Mom knows what Dad wants her to know. Nothing more, nothing less." We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us grappling with the impossible situation we'd been born into. Finally, Emma spoke again. "I've been thinking about running away." "No." The word came out sharper than I intended. "Em, you can't. He has people watching the gates, and even if you got past them, he has contacts with local police. They'd bring you back within hours, and then—" I couldn't finish the sentence. I'd seen what happened to followers who tried to leave without permission. "Then what am I supposed to do?" Her voice cracked. "Just wait here and let him." "Trust me," I interrupted. "I'm working on something. Something big. But I need you to hold on just a little longer." "Can you do that?" She studied my face in the darkness, and I saw a flicker of the sharp intelligence she used to show before Dad's programming really took hold. "You're planning something," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded slowly. "How long do I have to wait?" 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she squeezed my hand and whispered, "Okay. But if he tries anything before then—" "He won't," I promised, hoping desperately that I was right. "I'll make sure he won't." After Emma left my room, sleep was impossible. I spent the remaining hours until dawn staring at my phone, weighing an impossible decision. I had Agent Morrison's direct number memorized, and every fiber of my being wanted to call her immediately about Emma. But one premature move could collapse the entire investigation, and potentially put my sister in even more danger if Dad suspected anything. The Henderson family arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, their beat-up Ford pickup truck pulling through our compound gates like a lamb walking into a slaughterhouse. I watched from my bedroom window as Dad greeted them with his trademark warm smile and firm handshakes, already beginning his performance. Robert Henderson looked like a man carrying the weight of the world, probably recently unemployed given the timeline of their farm sale. His wife Linda clutched a worn Bible and gazed around our manicured grounds with the desperate hope of someone who needed to believe in something. But it was their daughters that made my chest tighten with dread. Rebecca, the 18-year-old, had the defiant posture of someone trying to protect her younger sister. Michelle, barely 16 like Emma, stayed close to her mother's side, dark eyes taking in everything with obvious anxiety. They had no idea what they were walking into. "Son." Dad's voice boomed across the courtyard. "Come meet our guests." I forced myself down the stairs and outside, plastering on the enthusiastic smile I'd perfected over years of pretending. Within minutes, I was shaking hands and playing the role of the fulfilled young adult who'd found purpose in Dad's teachings. "This is my eldest," Dad announced proudly, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "Straight A's in college, full scholarship, and still devoted to his spiritual foundation. He's going to show your daughters around today, help them see what our young people's lives look like here." Rebecca's eyes met mine with immediate suspicion. She'd clearly been dragged here against her will and wasn't buying the sales pitch. But Michelle seemed cautiously curious, probably hoping for friends her own age. "We're so grateful for your hospitality," Linda Henderson gushed. "The Lord clearly guided us here." If only she knew the Lord had nothing to do with it. Dad had been systematically targeting recently divorced families and struggling farmers for months, using social media and local newspapers to identify vulnerable people. The Hendersons were just his latest marks. "Why don't you girls start with a tour of our educational facilities?" Dad suggested. "Then perhaps you can join our young people for afternoon activities." As I led Rebecca and Michelle away from their parents, I could feel the weight of my impossible situation. I needed to protect these girls without exposing my investigation, guide them away from Dad's influence without being obvious about it, and somehow keep them safe for the next 3 days until their trial period ended. "So," Rebecca said as soon as we were out of earshot, "what's the real story here?" Her directness caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Cut the act. I've seen enough religious communities to know when something's off. The armed guards at the gate, the way everyone watches everyone else, the fact that your father insisted on taking our parents' cell phones for spiritual focus during our stay. She crossed her arms. This isn't a church. It's something else. Michelle looked between us nervously. Becca, don't be rude. These people are being nice to us. Nice people don't confiscate phones and search your luggage, Rebecca shot back. Then she turned to me again. So what's your father really running here? I stared at this 18-year-old girl who'd seen through Dad's facade in less than an hour when it had taken me years to fully understand what he was. She was exactly the type of person who would resist his programming, which made her extremely dangerous to have around. Let's continue the tour, I said carefully, glancing around to make sure we weren't being overheard. There's a lot you need to understand about how things work here. Rebecca's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. She'd caught my meaning perfectly. Time was running out faster than I'd anticipated. Over the next few hours, I walked a razor's edge trying to guide Rebecca and Michelle through the compound without triggering Dad's suspicions. Rebecca's sharp questions and obvious skepticism were like alarm bells in my head. If she kept this up in front of the wrong people, both sisters would be in serious danger. Why do all the women dress the same? Rebecca whispered as we passed a group of female followers in their mandatory long skirts and high-necked blouses. And why do they all have that same, vacant look? Before I could answer, Brother Marcus appeared beside us with that silent, predatory movement all of Dad's inner circle had perfected. How are our young guests enjoying their tour? His smile was friendly, but his eyes were calculating. It's fascinating, I said quickly. I was just showing them our gardens. Rebecca here was interested in our agricultural programs. Marcus's gaze lingered on Rebecca's jeans and tank top, clothing that would need to be corrected before evening services. Wonderful. Your father wants to see you in his office in 20 minutes. Something about tomorrow's schedule. After he left, Michelle tugged on my sleeve. He scared me. Why did he look at us like that? Some people here take the dress code very seriously, I said, which was technically true. What I couldn't tell her was that Marcus was probably already reporting to Dad about Rebecca's rebellious attitude and Michelle's impressionable nature. That evening at dinner, things went from bad to worse. The Henderson family sat at Dad's table, a supposed honor that was actually a psychological power play. Dad dominated the conversation with his usual charm offensive while I watched the family dynamics shift in real time. Robert Henderson hung on every word, desperate for the strong leadership he'd been missing. Linda nodded along to Dad's biblical interpretations, her earlier anxiety melting into relief at finding someone who seemed to have all the answers. Even Michelle was starting to smile and engage with the other young people Dad had strategically placed around her. But Rebecca remained stone-faced, picking at her food and answering questions with barely polite responses. Rebecca, Dad said suddenly, his voice taking on that hypnotic quality I knew so well, you seem troubled. Would you like to share what's on your heart? The entire dining hall went quiet. 40-some people turned to stare at an 18-year-old girl who had no idea she was being tested. I'm fine, Rebecca said evenly. Just tired from the trip. Often when we resist opening ourselves to new spiritual experiences, it's because we're carrying guilt or shame about something in our past. Dad's eyes bored into her. I have a gift for helping young people release those burdens. I felt my blood pressure spike. He was moving too fast, being too obvious. Rebecca was the type who would fight back, and if she made a scene. That's very kind, Rebecca replied, her voice steady despite the tremor I could see in her hands. But I'm pretty comfortable with my current spiritual state. A ripple of shock went through the room. Nobody talked back to Dad. Ever. Dad's smile widened, but I caught the flash of anger in his eyes. Of course. We never force enlightenment on anyone. Though I find it interesting that you speak of being comfortable when your family has lost their farm, your father can't find steady work, and you're all clearly searching for something better. The calculated cruelty of using their desperation against them made my stomach turn. Robert Henderson's face flushed with embarrassment while Linda looked like she wanted to disappear. But Rebecca's jaw just set harder. Thank you for the reminder, she said quietly. After dinner, as I escorted the girls back to their guest quarters, Rebecca grabbed my arm. Get us out of here, she whispered urgently. I don't care what you're really doing or why you're pretending to go along with this, but something very bad is about to happen to my family. She was right. And I was running out of time to stop it. That night, I made the most dangerous decision of my life. After lights out, I slipped out of my room and made my way to the guest quarters where the Henderson family was staying. The compound security was tight, but I'd grown up here, I knew every blind spot, every creaky floorboard to avoid. Rebecca was waiting for me in the hallway, still fully dressed. I knew you'd come, she whispered. My sister's been crying for an hour. She's terrified, but she doesn't even understand why. We need to talk, but not here. I led her through a service corridor to an old storage room in the basement that I discovered years ago, one of the few places in the compound without surveillance. What I'm about to tell you could get us both killed, so I need you to promise me you'll stay calm. Her eyes widened, but she nodded. Your father is running a cult. Not a church, a cult. He systematically targets vulnerable families, takes their money, isolates them from the outside world, and... I couldn't bring myself to tell her about the sexual abuse. Not yet. He destroys people. Completely. I knew it, she breathed. The way everyone acted, the fear in their eyes. How long have you been trapped here? I'm not trapped anymore. I'm working with the FBI to build a case against him. But the investigation isn't complete, and if he suspects anything, he'll disappear and start over somewhere else. Rebecca's face went pale. How long until you can arrest him? 2 weeks, maybe 3. But your family can't stay that long. Tomorrow, during your spiritual counseling session with him, he's going to start the psychological breakdown process. By day 3, your parents will be ready to sign over everything they have left. Then we leave tonight. You can't. I grabbed her shoulders. He has guards, contacts with local police. If your family just disappears, it'll trigger his paranoia protocols. He'll pack up the core group and vanish before the FBI can move. So what are you saying? That we should just sacrifice ourselves for your investigation. The accusation hit like a physical blow because part of it was true. I was asking this family to endure psychological torture so that dozens of other families might be saved. The mathematics of it made sense, but the morality was brutal. There might be another way, I said slowly, an idea forming. What if your family left, but not because they were running away? What if they had a legitimate emergency back home? Rebecca's eyes lit up. Like what? Your grandmother, your mother's mother. What if she had a medical emergency? Heart attack, stroke, something that would require your immediate return to Idaho. Grandma Rose lives in Boise. But how would we get word? They took our phones. I still have mine. Hidden. I pulled out the burner phone I'd been using to communicate with Agent Morrison. Do you have your grandmother's number? Yes, but... Here's what we're going to do. You're going to call her and explain the situation. Have her call your mother's old cell phone number, the one she gave to people before coming here. She'll tell whoever answers that she's had a heart attack and needs the family to come immediately. Rebecca was already dialing. Grandma Rose? It's Rebecca. I need you to listen carefully. 20 minutes later, we had our plan in motion. Grandma Rose, who sounded like exactly the kind of sharp-witted woman who'd raised someone like Rebecca, understood the situation immediately and agreed to play her part. She'll make the call at 6 a.m., Rebecca reported. Right during morning prayers when your father will be distracted. Perfect. The key is making it look like you're reluctant to leave. Your parents need to insist, even over Dad's objections. Can you sell that? Are you kidding? After what I've seen today, getting my family out of here will be the easiest acting job of my life. As I prepared to escort her back to the guest quarters, Rebecca grabbed my arm again. What about your sister? Emma? I saw how she looked at your father during dinner. Like she was terrified of him. My chest tightened. Rebecca had noticed in one day what took me years to fully understand. I'm working on that too, I said. Work faster, she whispered. Whatever your father is planning for her, it's going to happen soon. I can see it in his eyes. She was right. And tomorrow, after the Henderson family left, Dad's attention would turn back to the girls who couldn't escape. The clock was ticking faster than ever. The next morning unfolded exactly as we'd planned, until it didn't. Grandma Rose's call came through at 6:03 a.m., right as morning prayers were ending. I watched from across the dining hall as one of Dad's assistants whispered urgently in his ear, his face darkening as he processed the interruption. Within minutes, Linda Henderson was sobbing over her mother's heart attack, while Robert demanded they leave immediately. Brother Robert, Dad said in his most soothing voice, I understand your concern, but surely your mother-in-law is receiving excellent medical care. Perhaps this is a test of your faith. She's 84 years old and asking for us, Robert interrupted, his farmer's practicality overriding Dad's manipulation for once. We're leaving. Now. I felt a surge of relief as I watched Rebecca play her part perfectly, acting torn between wanting to stay with her new friends and loyalty to her family. Even Michelle seemed genuinely conflicted, which made the performance more believable. But then Emma appeared at my elbow, her face pale with panic. He wants to see me in his office after the Hendersons leave, she whispered. For my spiritual readiness evaluation. My blood turned to ice. The timing was too coincidental. Dad was accelerating his timeline because he suspected something. Maybe Rebecca's resistance had triggered his paranoia, or maybe he'd planned this all along. Either way, Emma was about to walk into the nightmare I'd been desperately trying to prevent. Tell him you're feeling sick, I whispered back. Buy us some time. I already tried. He said spiritual wellness comes before physical comfort. Her hands were shaking. He's going to. No, he's not. The words came out harder than I intended, loud enough that several people nearby turned to look. I forced a smile and lowered my voice. Trust me, Em. I won't let that happen. But as I watched the Henderson family load their meager belongings back into their truck, I realized I was out of moves. Emma couldn't run, there was nowhere for her to go. I couldn't expose myself by confronting Dad directly. And the FBI wasn't ready to move yet. The truck disappeared through the compound gates, taking my last hope of a clean solution with it. Son. Dad's voice behind me made every muscle in my body tense. Walk with me. We strolled through the compound's gardens in silence, Dad's hands clasped behind his back like some benevolent patriarch. But I could feel the predatory energy radiating off him. He was hunting, and I wasn't sure who the prey was. Interesting morning, he said finally. Convenient timing for Mrs. Henderson's medical emergency. These things happen, I replied carefully. Indeed they do. He stopped walking and turned to face me, those cold blue eyes searching my face for tells. The Henderson girl, Rebecca, she reminded me of you at that age. Questioning everything, resisting authority, thinking she was smarter than everyone around her. She was just scared. New place, new people. Was she? Dad stepped closer, invading my personal space in that way he used to intimidate followers. Or was she looking for weaknesses in our community? Asking the kinds of questions someone might ask if they'd been coached on what to look for. The accusation hung between us like a loaded gun. I kept my expression neutral, but my mind was racing. How much did he suspect? How much did he know? I think you're reading too much into it, I said. She was just a skeptical teenager. Dad smiled, but it was the cold, calculating expression that had haunted my nightmares for years. Perhaps you're right. I suppose we'll know soon enough. He resumed walking. In any case, her departure frees up time in my schedule. Emma and I will have our conversation this afternoon instead of tomorrow. The trap snapped shut around me. He was moving faster precisely because he suspected something. And there was nothing I could do to stop it without destroying everything. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as I paced behind the equipment shed, my phone pressed to my ear with sweaty palms. Agent Morrison, you don't understand, this can't wait, I whispered urgently into the burner phone. He's moved up his timeline. My sister is in immediate danger. I hear you, came her steady voice through the speaker. But we're still building the financial case. If we move too early and he beats the charges on a technicality, Then find another way. My voice cracked with desperation. Set up a wellness check, a surprise inspection, anything that gets law enforcement on the property today. It doesn't work like that. We need probable cause for any official action, and right now everything we have is circumstantial. The recordings help, but we need more concrete evidence before. I ended the call, my hands shaking with rage and helplessness. Emma's appointment was in less than 2 hours, and the FBI was still talking about building cases and following procedures. They didn't understand that my father wasn't just some white-collar criminal, he was a predator who'd been planning this moment for months. A shadow fell across me, and I spun around to find Brother Marcus standing there with that unsettling smile. Talking to someone important, he asked casually. Just checking my class schedule, I replied, quickly pocketing the phone. Making sure I don't miss any assignments while I'm here helping with the Henderson family situation. Marcus nodded slowly, but his eyes were calculating. Your father wants to see you. Now. The walk to Dad's office felt like a death march. Every step echoed in the hallway, every face I passed seemed to be watching me with suspicious eyes. Had Marcus heard enough of my conversation to piece things together? Was Dad about to confront me directly? I knocked on the heavy wooden door and waited for his permission to enter. Come in, son. Dad was sitting behind his massive desk, but he wasn't alone. Dr. Patricia Henley, the compound's counselor, a former therapist who'd been stripped of her license for ethics violations, sat in a chair to his right. Her presence made my stomach drop. Sit down, Dad commanded. Dr. Henley and I have been discussing your recent behavior patterns. I took the uncomfortable wooden chair facing them both, trying to keep my expression neutral while my mind raced through possible escape strategies. Your father is concerned about your emotional state, Dr. Henley said in that clinical voice that had broken down dozens of followers over the years. Periods of isolation, resistance to family activities, signs of anxiety and secretiveness. I've just been focused on school. Don't lie to me. Dad's voice cut through my excuse like a blade. I've been watching you, son. Really watching. And what I see is someone who's lost his way spiritually. He stood and began pacing behind his desk, warming up for one of his psychological dismantling sessions. You think you're smarter than everyone here. You think your college education has given you some special insight that the rest of us lack. But what you don't realize is that doubt is a spiritual cancer. It spreads and corrupts everything it touches. I'm not doubting anything, I said, but even I could hear how hollow it sounded. Dr. Henley leaned forward, her pen poised over a legal pad. We'd like to try some intensive therapy sessions. Help you work through whatever's causing this resistance to your family's love and guidance. Intensive therapy. I knew what that meant, hours of psychological manipulation designed to break down my sense of reality and rebuild it according to Dad's specifications. Some followers never recovered from Dr. Henley's treatment. That sounds helpful, I forced myself to say. When would we start? Immediately, Dad replied. In fact, I think it would be beneficial for you and Emma to go through the process together. Shared healing, strengthening your sibling bond. The trap became crystal clear. He was going to use me to control Emma, make her feel safe while he systematically destroyed both our minds. And if I resisted, if I tried to protect her, it would only confirm his suspicions about my spiritual corruption. Dr. Henley has cleared her schedule for the rest of the week, Dad continued. You'll both be staying in the reflection quarters where you can focus entirely on your healing without outside distractions. Reflection quarters. Isolation cells, basically, soundproofed rooms in a basement where difficult followers were kept during their therapeutic breakthroughs. Once we were down there, anything could happen and no one would hear us scream. I appreciate your concern, I said carefully, but I have midterms next week. Maybe we could schedule this for. Your spiritual health is more important than any earthly examination. Dad's tone brooked no argument. Dr. Henley will begin your evaluation in 1 hour. Emma's will follow immediately after. As I left his office on unsteady legs, I realized the endgame had arrived much faster than anticipated. In 60 minutes, Emma and I would disappear into the bowels of the compound, and there was no guarantee either of us would emerge with our sanity intact. The FBI investigation, the carefully gathered evidence, my plans to expose everything, none of it mattered if we didn't survive the next 24 hours. I had 1 hour to figure out a way to save us both, and absolutely no idea how to do it. The reflection quarters were in the basement of the administrative building, accessible only through a service elevator that required Dad's personal key card. I'd been down there once before, years ago, when he'd caught me trying to sneak out to meet friends from school. Even then, just the threat of being locked up had been enough to break my spirit for months. Now, with less than 30 minutes before my evaluation, I was running out of options fast. I found Emma in her room, sitting on her bed and staring at the wall with hollow eyes. She'd already changed into the plain white dress that Dad required for spiritual cleansing sessions, a detail that made my skin crawl. We have to go, I said, closing the door behind me and checking to make sure we weren't being watched through the window. Where? Her voice was flat, defeated. You said 2 more weeks. You said you had a plan. Plans change. Dad suspects something, and Dr. Henley, I couldn't finish the sentence. We both knew what happened to people who went into intensive therapy sessions and came out different. If they came out at all. Emma's hands were trembling as she smoothed down her dress. Maybe it won't be as bad as we think. Maybe if I just cooperate, do whatever they want. No. I knelt in front of her, forcing her to meet my eyes. Listen to me. What Dad is planning, what he's been building up to, cooperation won't save you. It'll just make it easier for him. Then what are we supposed to do? Tears started rolling down her cheeks. Even if we could get past the guards, where would we go? We don't have money, we don't have anywhere. I've been talking to the FBI. The words hung between us like a bomb. Emma's eyes widened, cycling through shock, terror, and something that might have been hope. You're serious. Dead serious. I've been building a case against Dad for months. Financial fraud, psychological abuse, everything. But they need more time to make it stick, and we don't have more time. Emma stood up abruptly and began pacing, her mind clearly racing. The FBI. Jesus. If Dad finds out before they arrest him. He won't. Because we're not going to be here when that happens. I pulled out my phone and showed her the contact information I'd memorized. Agent Morrison is expecting updates from me every few days. When I don't check in after our therapy sessions, she'll know something's wrong. How long until they realize we're missing? Maybe a day. Maybe 2. I hated how uncertain it sounded. But there's something else. I helped another family escape yesterday, the Hendersons. They know what's happening here now, and they have contacts outside who can verify their story. For the first time in weeks, Emma's expression showed a flicker of her old fire. So this whole thing is already in motion. Yeah. The question is whether we can survive long enough for it to play out. A soft knock on the door made us both freeze. Emma. Mom's voice came through the wood, artificially cheerful in that way that meant Dad was probably standing right behind her. It's time for your appointment, honey. Emma and I looked at each other, having an entire conversation in that single glance. We were out of time, out of options, and completely trapped. Coming, Mom, Emma called out, her voice steadier than I'd expected. As we walked toward the door, she grabbed my hand and squeezed it once. Whatever happens down there, she whispered, don't let them break you completely. Someone needs to remember who we really were. The hallway outside was crowded with followers going about their daily activities, all of them carefully avoiding eye contact as Mom led us toward the elevator. Brother Marcus appeared at my elbow with that predatory smile, while Sister Catherine flanked Emma on the other side. We weren't just being escorted to therapy. We were being taken into custody. The elevator doors closed with a soft ding, and we began our descent into the basement levels I'd hoped never to see again. The elevator descended with mechanical precision, each floor marking our journey deeper into Dad's carefully constructed hell. Mom stood rigid beside me, her knuckles white as she gripped her prayer book, a tell I'd learned to recognize years ago when she was trying to convince herself that what was happening was righteous. The reflection quarters have been specially prepared for your healing, she said, her voice hollow with forced enthusiasm. Dr. Henley says the isolation will help you focus on what's truly important. Emma's hand found mine in the cramped space, her palms slick with sweat. Through the elevator's small window, I caught glimpses of the basement levels most followers never saw, storage rooms filled with confiscated personal belongings, filing cabinets stuffed with financial documents, and surveillance equipment that monitored every corner of the compound. The elevator shuddered to a stop at sublevel 2. Dr. Henley was waiting for us in the sterile white hallway, her clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. Behind her stood 2 more of Dad's inner circle, Brother James and Sister Ruth, their presence making it clear this wasn't just therapy, it was imprisonment. Welcome to your spiritual rebirth, Dr. Henley said with that clinical smile that never reached her eyes. The next few days will be challenging, but I promise you'll emerge as your truest selves. The reflection quarters stretched down a long corridor lined with unmarked doors. Each room was soundproofed, climate-controlled, and equipped with nothing but a narrow bed, a small sink, and a security camera mounted in the corner. I'd heard whispers about what happened in these rooms, followers who went in defiant and came out as hollow-eyed devotees, their personalities scrubbed clean and rebuilt according to Dad's specifications. Emma, you'll be in room 7, Dr. Henley announced, consulting her clipboard. We'll begin with some baseline psychological assessments to determine the extent of your spiritual contamination. And I'll be next door. I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh no, dear, she replied with that predatory smile. Your treatment will be much more intensive. Room 12 is specially equipped for cases of advanced spiritual rebellion. Room 12. I'd heard Brother Marcus mention it once in hushed tones, it was where they kept the followers who required enhanced therapeutic techniques. The implication made my stomach churn. As they separated us, Emma shot me one last desperate look. In her eyes, I saw the same realization that was dawning on me, Dad wasn't just trying to break us psychologically. He was systematically eliminating the last witnesses to his crimes who couldn't be bought, threatened, or manipulated. The reflection quarters weren't therapy rooms. They were execution chambers for inconvenient truths. This way, son, Brother Marcus said, his hand heavy on my shoulder as he guided me toward the far end of the corridor. Room 12 was larger than the others, with additional equipment I didn't recognize, speakers built into the walls, restraints attached to the bed frame, and medical instruments arranged on a stainless steel cart. Whatever Dr. Henley had planned for me, it went far beyond traditional psychological manipulation. Your father wants you to know how much this hurts him, Marcus said as he secured the first restraint around my wrist. But sometimes love requires difficult choices. Through the thin walls, I could hear Emma's voice in the distance, not screaming yet, but pleading. Dr. Henley had begun her work immediately, and the sound of my sister begging for mercy nearly broke what remained of my resolve. As Marcus finished with the restraints, Dr. Henley's voice crackled through the intercom system. Let's begin with some simple questions about your recent activities. Have you been in contact with anyone outside the compound who shouldn't know about our internal affairs? The real interrogation was starting, and I realized with crystal clarity that they already knew far more than I'd suspected. The interrogation began with white noise, a low, constant hum pumped through the speakers that made it impossible to think clearly. Dr. Henley's voice cut through it at irregular intervals, asking seemingly innocent questions that I knew were anything but random. Tell me about your college friends, she said through the intercom. Anyone you've grown particularly close to lately? I kept my mouth shut, focusing on the restraints around my wrists. They were tight enough to restrict movement but not quite tight enough to cut off circulation, a calculated choice designed for long-term interrogation rather than quick results. We have time, Dr. Henley continued. Your father has cleared his schedule for the rest of the week. We can take as long as necessary to work through your issues. The white noise shifted to a higher frequency, and I felt my teeth start to ache. This wasn't therapy, it was sophisticated psychological torture designed to break down mental defenses. How many other followers had been strapped to this same bed, subjected to the same systematic dismantling of their sanity? Through the walls, I could hear Emma's voice getting more strained. Whatever they were doing to her was escalating, and the sound of her distress made every muscle in my body tense against the restraints. Your sister is very cooperative, Dr. Henley observed, as if reading my thoughts. She's already told us about several interesting conversations you two have had recently. Late-night visits to her room, discussions about leaving the compound. My blood went cold. Emma hadn't betrayed me, they were lying, trying to make me think she'd already broken so I'd give up my own secrets. But the fact that they knew about our conversations meant someone had been watching us more closely than I'd realized. The door opened and Dad walked in, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere in the room. He pulled up a chair next to the bed and sat down, studying my face with those predatory eyes. "I'm disappointed," he said quietly. "I gave you every opportunity to come to me honestly. Instead, you chose deception. Betrayal. Actions that could destroy everything we've built here. I don't know what you're talking about." His hand moved faster than I could track, striking my cheek with enough force to make my ears ring. The casual violence was somehow more terrifying than if he'd been angry. This was just business to him. "Brother Marcus saw you making phone calls behind the equipment shed," Dad said conversationally. "Always to the same number. A number that, when we traced it, led to some very interesting discoveries." My heart hammered against my ribs. If they'd tracked the phone back to Agent Morrison, the entire investigation was blown. Months of careful work, dozens of potential victims who could be saved, all of it destroyed because I'd been careless. "The FBI has been very interested in our community lately," Dad continued. "Agent Morrison in particular seems to have developed quite an obsession with our financial practices. I wonder how she got the idea that there was anything worth investigating here." He leaned closer, and I could smell the coffee on his breath, see the gold flecks in his cold blue eyes. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me exactly what you shared with federal law enforcement. Every conversation, every document, every detail of your betrayal. And then you're going to help me clean up this mess before it spreads any further. And if I refuse?" Dad's smile was colder than winter. "Then your sister will take your place in our conversation. And unlike you, she doesn't have years of spiritual training to help her resist Dr. Henley's more intensive techniques." Through the intercom, Emma's pleading voice suddenly cut off, replaced by an ominous silence that made my stomach drop. "Choose quickly," Dad whispered. "My patience isn't infinite, and neither is her resilience." The silence from Emma's room stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. I strained against the restraints, trying to hear any sound that would tell me she was still okay, but the soundproofing was too effective. "Tick-tock," Dad said, checking his expensive watch, a gift from some follower who donated their retirement savings. "Dr. Henley is very creative when she needs to be. Did you know she used to work in experimental psychology before her career change?" I closed my eyes, trying to think through the white noise still pulsing through the speakers. Every instinct screamed at me to tell him everything, to protect Emma at any cost. But if I broke now, it wouldn't just doom us, it would doom every future victim he'd target once he relocated and started over. "You're stalling," Dad observed. "Trying to figure out if there's some clever way out of this." "There isn't. The only question is how much pain you're willing to let your sister endure for your principles." A soft chime came through the intercom, followed by Dr. Henley's clinical voice. "We're ready to proceed to phase 2 if you'd like to observe." "Emma can hear us right now," Dad said, leaning back in his chair. "Would you like to tell her why you're choosing to let this continue?" My mind raced through possibilities, looking for any angle I'd missed. The FBI knew I was here, but they weren't expecting contact for another day or two. The Henderson family was safe but had no way to reach law enforcement quickly. Mom was completely under Dad's control, and every other follower was too terrified or brainwashed to help. But then I remembered something Rebecca Henderson had said: work faster. She'd seen through Dad's facade in hours, recognized the danger immediately. Someone that sharp, that protective of her family, wouldn't just drive away and forget what she'd witnessed. She'd want to make sure no one else suffered what they'd almost experienced. "You made a mistake with the Henderson family," I said suddenly. Dad's eyebrows rose slightly. "How so?" "Rebecca. You let someone leave who saw right through you. Someone smart enough to piece together what you're really doing here, connected enough to know who to call about it. A frightened teenager with wild stories. Who would believe her? The FBI agent who's already investigating you. The same one you're so worried about." I forced a smile despite my situation. "You think I was your only source of problems, but I wasn't. I was just confirmation of what they already suspected." Something flickered in Dad's eyes, not quite fear, but calculation. He was weighing possibilities, trying to determine how much of what I'd said was truth versus desperate bluffing. "Interesting theory," he said finally. "But it doesn't change your immediate situation. Even if other people are asking questions, you're still here, your sister is still next door, and I still need to know exactly what damage you've done to my organization." The intercom crackled again. "Patient is showing signs of distress. Should I continue?" Dad stood up, straightening his suit jacket with practiced calm. "You have 30 seconds to start talking, or Emma's therapy becomes much more intensive. And unlike your imaginary rescue scenarios, her pain is very real and happening right now." Through the white noise, I caught a sound that made my blood freeze, Emma's voice, high and panicked, calling my name. Dad's hand moved toward the intercom button. "Your choice," he said. The sound of Emma screaming my name shattered what remained of my resolve. Every protective instinct I'd ever had roared to life, drowning out rational thought. "Stop!" I shouted against the restraints. "I'll tell you everything, just leave her alone." Dad's hand paused over the intercom button, and that predatory smile spread across his face again. "I'm listening. Agent Morrison has been building a financial fraud case for 3 months. I gave her bank records, donation receipts, property transfers, everything I could access through the church computers." The words tumbled out in a desperate rush. "She has recordings of your sermons where you promised followers their donations would go to charity, then funneled the money into personal accounts. What else? Testimonies from former members. Sarah Morrison's family, the Delacroix, at least 6 others who left and were willing to go on record about the psychological manipulation, the isolation tactics, I couldn't bring myself to mention the sexual abuse allegations, not with Emma listening through whatever surveillance system connected our rooms." Dad nodded thoughtfully, processing each revelation like a chess master calculating his next move. "Timeline. She said they needed 2 more weeks to make the case airtight. Maybe less now that the Henderson family can corroborate the psychological manipulation techniques. And your role in all this?" "I was just gathering information. Nothing official, no wiretaps or formal cooperation agreements. She was building the case with or without me, I just made it faster." Through the intercom, Emma's panicked breathing gradually slowed. Dad had signaled Dr. Henley to ease off, buying himself time to think through the implications of what I'd revealed. You realize what you've forced me to do, he said quietly, but there was no anger in his voice now, just cold calculation. 47 people live on this compound. Families, children, elderly followers who've given me everything they have. Because of your betrayal, they'll all have to disappear. The casual way he discussed destroying dozens of lives made my stomach turn. These weren't just followers to him, they were assets, tools, collateral damage in his larger schemes. Where will you take them? That's not your concern anymore. Dad stood and straightened his jacket again. Dr. Henley will continue your treatment while I make the necessary arrangements. By tomorrow night, this place will be empty, and everyone who could testify against me will be somewhere the FBI will never find them. You can't just vanish 47 people. Someone will notice, ask questions. Will they? His smile was genuinely amused now. Most of our followers severed contact with outside family months ago. The few remaining connections believe their loved ones are on a spiritual retreat in a remote location with no phone service. It will be weeks before anyone realizes they're truly missing, and by then. He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the sterile air. Dad wasn't just planning to relocate, he was planning to eliminate anyone who could tie him to this location. The beauty of working with broken people, he continued, is that no one expects them to stay in touch. No one looks too hard when they disappear. Society has already written them off as lost causes. Through the walls, I could hear activity in the corridors, footsteps, voices, the sound of equipment being moved. The evacuation was already beginning, and I realized with growing horror that Dad had been planning for this contingency long before my interrogation started. How long have you known? I asked. About your FBI contact. Since yesterday. About your general disloyalty. Much longer. Dad moved toward the door, then paused. Brother Marcus has been monitoring your phone calls for weeks. We just needed to know how much damage you'd done before we implemented our departure protocols. Then why the interrogation? Why not just leave immediately? Dad's expression grew almost paternal, which somehow made it more terrifying. Because I needed to know if you could still be salvaged, son. Despite everything, you're my blood. I hoped we could bring you back into the fold before the relocation. And now? Now you're a liability that needs to be managed. The intercom crackled one final time. Patient transfer is ready when you are. Dad nodded and pressed the button. Proceed with the relocation prep. Both patients go to the secondary facility. As his footsteps faded down the corridor, the reality of our situation crystallized with brutal clarity. There would be no rescue, no last-minute FBI raid, no clever escape plan. Dad was evacuating the entire compound, taking his most loyal followers to some prepared location where he could continue his operations while eliminating anyone who posed a threat. Emma and I weren't just prisoners anymore, we were loose ends about to be permanently tied off. Through the white noise, I heard new sounds, vehicles starting up outside, the mechanical hum of the freight elevator, voices giving orders in the urgent but controlled tones of a well-rehearsed emergency plan. The compound that had been my prison for 22 years was about to become my tomb, and there was absolutely nothing I could do to stop it. The sound of vehicles starting outside grew louder, accompanied by the organized chaos of a mass evacuation. Through the thin walls, I could hear followers being herded through the corridors, confused voices asking questions that were met with firm but reassuring responses from Dad's inner circle. It's just a temporary relocation, Sister Ruth's voice carried from somewhere nearby. Brother David has received a divine vision about moving to our promised land. The lies came so easily to them, wrapped in spiritual language that made questioning seem like a crisis of faith rather than common sense. These people trusted Dad completely, and he was leading them straight into whatever nightmare he'd prepared as his backup plan. The restraints around my wrists had loosened slightly as I'd struggled against them during the interrogation, leaving just enough play that I could work my left hand partially free. Not enough to escape, but enough to reach the emergency call button built into the bed frame, a safety feature Dr. Henley probably assumed was disabled. The button connected to the compound's main security system, which would log any activation along with a timestamp and room location. If the FBI eventually searched this place, they'd have a record that Emma and I had been held here against our will. It wasn't much, but it was something. I pressed it 3 times in quick succession, paused, then 3 more times. An SOS pattern that Agent Morrison would hopefully recognize if she ever accessed the security logs. Footsteps in the corridor announced someone's approach, too light to be Marcus or Dad, probably Dr. Henley coming to prepare us for transport. The door opened with a soft hiss of pressurized air. Time to go, she announced, wheeling in a gurney equipped with leather restraints. The secondary facility is much better equipped for intensive therapeutic interventions. Where's my sister? Being prepared for transport in the next room. Don't worry, you'll be reunited soon enough. Her clinical smile never wavered as she began unlocking my restraints. Though I should warn you that any attempt to resist or escape will result in immediate sedation. The drugs we use are quite effective, but they do have some unpleasant side effects. As she freed my wrists, I caught a glimpse of something that made my heart skip, a small piece of paper tucked under the medical equipment tray, folded so only a corner was visible. Someone had left a message. Dr. Henley was focused on preparing the gurney's restraints, her back turned to me as she adjusted the straps. Moving as carefully as possible, I reached for the hidden paper and palmed it, the movement disguised as stretching my cramped muscles. The note was tiny, written in Emma's handwriting, Mom knows. She's helping. Stall. My mind reeled. Mom, who'd been Dad's most devoted follower for over a decade, was somehow involved in helping us. It seemed impossible, but Emma had no reason to lie and every reason to be accurate about potential allies. On the gurney, please, Dr. Henley instructed, turning back toward me with a syringe in her hand, insurance against any resistance. As she strapped me down, I caught a glimpse through the small window in the door. The corridor was busy with followers carrying suitcases and boxes, but something was wrong with the scene. The evacuation looked organized from a distance, but up close I could see the confusion and fear on people's faces. These weren't willing participants in a spiritual journey, they were prisoners being moved under the guise of religious obedience. Dr. Henley wheeled me out of room 12 and down the corridor toward the freight elevator. As we passed room 7, I heard Emma's voice through the door, not panicked anymore, but speaking in low, urgent tones to someone else. Your sister is quite resilient, Dr. Henley observed, noticing my attention. She's already adapted well to the idea of relocation. Some people are naturally more flexible than others. The elevator doors opened to reveal the compound's loading dock, where several unmarked trucks waited with their engines running. Dad stood near the largest vehicle, directing the loading process with the calm efficiency of someone who planned for this scenario in detail. When he saw me being wheeled out, his expression shifted to something almost resembling regret. I really had hoped we could avoid this, he said, approaching the gurney. But you forced my hand, son. The secondary facility will give us time to properly address your spiritual corruption without outside interference. How many other families have you destroyed like this? I asked, my voice hoarse from the earlier interrogation. Dad's hand rested on my shoulder with paternal weight. I don't destroy families. I save them from a world that would have consumed them anyway. The people here are safer, happier, and more fulfilled than they ever were before finding me. The delusion in his voice was complete. He genuinely believed his own lies, which somehow made him even more dangerous than if he'd been consciously evil. As they loaded my gurney into the back of the truck, I caught sight of Emma being brought out on her own gurney, her eyes alert despite whatever drugs they'd given her. Our gazes met for just a moment, and she gave an almost imperceptible nod. Whatever Mom's plan was, it was about to unfold. The truck's engine rumbled to life as Dad climbed into the passenger seat, but something was wrong. The convoy that should have contained 47 followers consisted of only 3 vehicles, nowhere near enough to transport everyone who'd been living at the compound. Through the truck's small rear window, I could see flashing lights in the distance, growing brighter as they approached the compound gates. What the hell? Dad's voice cut through the engine noise as he spotted the same lights I was seeing. The truck lurched to a stop, and I heard Dad barking orders into his radio, all units hold position. Marcus, what's your status at the perimeter? Brother Marcus's panicked voice crackled back, federal agents at the main gate with warrants. Multiple vehicles, maybe 20 agents. They're demanding immediate entry. My heart soared as the pieces clicked into place. Mom hadn't just helped Emma, she'd been feeding information to the FBI, probably through some communication channel Dad never suspected. The evacuation had been a trap, designed to gather all his core accomplices in one place when law enforcement arrived. Dad's face appeared at the truck's rear window, his usual calm completely shattered. This is impossible. The timeline, you said 2 weeks. I said Agent Morrison told me 2 weeks, I replied, unable to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. But I never said that was accurate. Through the chaos, I heard Emma's voice from the gurney next to mine. Mom's been recording your conversations for months, Dad. Every confession about the money, every time you talked about managing difficult followers. She gave it all to the FBI. The sound of multiple vehicles screeching to a halt outside was followed by the unmistakable boom of a loudspeaker, federal agents. This compound is surrounded. Exit the building with your hands visible. Dad's face cycled through rage, disbelief, and something that might have been respect for an opponent who'd outmaneuvered him. Dar. Henley fumbled with keys, trying to unlock our restraints as the truck shook with the weight of boots hitting the loading dock. David Morrison, you are under arrest for mail fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Agent Morrison's voice carried clearly as tactical teams swarmed the area. The truck's rear doors burst open, revealing FBI agents in tactical gear with weapons drawn. Behind them, I could see Mom standing with Agent Morrison, her face streaked with tears but her spine straight with newfound strength. It's over, Agent Morrison announced, her eyes meeting mine with professional satisfaction. We've got everything, financial records, victim testimonies, recordings of coercion and abuse. Your mother provided enough evidence to put him away for life. As they cut through my restraints, I saw Dad being handcuffed near the loading dock, his empire of lies finally crumbling around him. Followers emerged from the compound in various states of confusion and relief, many of them crying as they realized they were finally free. Emma grabbed my hand as they freed her from her own gurney, both of us shaking as the adrenaline began to wear off. How long has Mom been working with them? I asked Agent Morrison. 6 months, she replied. Ever since your sister came to her about the special blessing ceremonies. Your mother reached out to us independently, before you ever made contact. The 2 investigations complemented each other perfectly. As paramedics checked us over and we gave our initial statements, I watched my father disappear into a federal transport vehicle, his face blank with the realization that his carefully constructed world had been destroyed by the very people he thought he controlled completely. The compound fell silent for the first time in years, and somehow, despite everything we'd lost, it felt like we could finally breathe.